night!" she exclaimed in the middle of the day. With the same blast of exasperation, someone else might say, "Oh, for God's sake." Few, it seemed, could live up to Robbie's standards. The sound of people trying, however, became the soundtrack of our life. There was plinking in the afternoons, plinking in the evenings. Ladies from the church sometimes came over to practice hymns, belting the piety through our walls. Under Robbie's rules, kids who took piano lessons were allowed to work on only one song at a time. For my room, I'd listen to them attempting, note by uncertain note, to win her approval, graduating from Hot Cross Buns to Brim's Lullaby. But only after many tries. The music was never annoying. It was just persistent. It crept up the stairwell that separated our space from Robbie's. It drifted through open windows in the summertime, accompanying my thoughts as I played with my Barbies or built little kingdoms made out of blocks. The only respite came when my father got home from an early shift at the city's water treatment plant and put the Cubs game on the TV, boosting the volume with just enough to blot it all out. This was the tail end of the 1960s on the south side of Chicago. The Cubs weren't bad, but they weren't great either. I'd sit on my dad's lap in his recliner and listen to him narrate how the Cubs were in the middle of a late season swoon, or why Billy Williams, who lived around the corner from us on Constance Avenue, had such a sweet swing from the left side of the plate. Outside the ballparks, America was in the midst of a massive, uncertain shift. The Kennedys were dead. Martin Luther King Jr. had been killed standing on a balcony in Memphis, setting off riots across the country, including Chicago. The 1968 Democratic National Convention turned bloody as police went after Vietnam War protesters with batons and tear gas in Grant Park. About 9 miles north of the city where we lived, white families, meanwhile, were moving out of the cities in droves, lured by the suburbs, the promise of better schools, more space, and probably more whiteness, too.
None of this really registered with me. I was just a kid, a girl with Barbies and blocks, with 2 parents and an older brother who slept each night with his head about 3 feet from mine. My family was my world, the center of everything. My mother taught me how to read early, walking me to the public library, sitting with me as I sounded out words on a page. My father went to work every day dressed in the blue uniform of a city laborer. But at night, he showed us what it meant to love jazz and art.
As a boy, he'd taken classes at the Art Institution of Chicago, and in high school, he painted and sculpted. He'd been a competitive swimmer, a boxer in school too. As an adult, he was a fan of every televised sport, from professional golf to the NHL. He appreciated seeing strong people excel. When my brother Craig got interested in basketball, my father propped coins above the door frame in our kitchen, encouraging him to leap for them. Everything that mattered was within a 5-block radius. My grandparents and cousins, the church on the corner where we weren't quite regulars at Sunday school, the gas station where my mother sometimes sent me to pick up a pack of Newports, and the liquor store which also sold Wonder Bread, penny candy, and gallons of milk. On hot summer nights, Craig and I dozed off to the sound of cheers from the adult league softball games going on at the nearby public park, where by day we climbed on the playground's jungle gym and played tag with other kids. Craig and I were not quite 2 years apart in age. He got my father's soft eyes, optimistic spirits, and my mother implacability. The two of us have always been tight, in part thanks to an unwavering and somewhat inexplicable allegiance. He seemed to feel for his baby sister right from the start. There's an early family photograph in black and white of the four of us sitting on a couch. My mother smiling as she holds me on her lap. My father appearing serious and proud with Craig perching on his. We're dressed for church, but maybe a wedding. I'm about 8 months old and pudge face, no nonsense bruiser in diapers, and an iron white dress, looking ready to slide out of my mother's clutches, staring at the camera as if I might eat it. Next to me is Craig, gentlemanly in a little bow tie and suit jacket, bearing an earnest expression. He's 2 years old, and I'm already the portrait of brotherly villages.
Wait, he's 2 years old and already the portrait of brotherly vigilance and responsibility. His arm extended toward mine, his fingers wrapped protectively around my fat wrist. At the time the photo was taken, we were living across the hall from my father's parents in Parkway Gardens, an affordable housing project on the south side made up of modest apartment buildings. It had been built in the 1950s and was designed as a co-op meant to ease a post-World War II housing shortage for black working-class families. Later, it will deteriorate under the grind of poverty and gang violence, becoming one of the city's more dangerous places to live. Long before this, though, when I was still a toddler, my parents, who had met as teenagers and married in their mid-20s, accepted an offer to move a few miles south to Robbie and Terry's place in a nicer neighborhood. On Euclid Ave, we were two households living under one not very big roof. Judging from the layout, the second floor space had probably been designed as an in-law apartment meant for one or two people, but four of us found a way to fit inside. My parents slept in the lone bedroom, while Craig and I shared a bigger area that I assume was intended to be the living room. Later, as we grew, my grandfather, Prunell Shields, my mother's father, who was an enthusiastic, if not deeply skilled carpenter, bought over some cheap wooden paneling and built a makeshift partition to divide the room into two separate spaces. He added a plastic accordion door to each space and created a little common play area in front where we could keep our toys and books. I loved my room. It was just big enough for a twin bed and a narrow desk. I kept all my stuffed animals on the bed, painstakingly tucking them around my head each night as a form of ritual comfort. On his side of the wall, Craig lived a sort of mirror existence, with his own bed pushed up against the paneling parallel to mine. The partition between us was so flimsy that we could talk as we lay in the bed at night, often tossing a bald sock back and forth through the 10-inch gap between the partition and the ceiling as we did.
Aunt Robbie, meanwhile, kept her part of the house in a mausoleum, the furniture swatched in protective plastic that felt cold and sticky on my bare legs when I dared to sit on it. Her sleeves were loaded with porcelain figurines. Her shelves were loaded with porcelain figurines we weren't allowed to touch. I let my hand hover over a set of sweet-faced glass poodles, a delicate-looking mother, and 3 tiny puppies, and then pull it back, fearing Robbie's wrath. When lessons weren't happening, the first floor was deadly silent. The television was never on, the radio never played, and I'm not even sure the two of them talked much down there. Robbie's husband, full name, was William Victor Terry, but for some reason, we only called him by his last name. Terry was like a shadow, a distinguished-looking man who who wore three-piece suits every day of the week and pretty much never said a word. I came to think of upstairs and downstairs as two different universes, ruled by competing sensibilities. Upstairs, we were noisy and unapologetically so. Craig and I threw balls and chased each other around the apartment. We sprayed pledge furniture polish on the wood floor of the hallway so we could slide farther and faster in our socks. Often crashing into the walls, we held brother-sister boxing matches in the kitchen, using the 2 sets of gloves my dad had given us for Christmas, along with personalized instructions on how to land a proper jab.
That means Michelle Obama can kick your butt. At night, as a family, we played board games, told stories and jokes, and cranked Jackson 5 records on the stereo. When it got to be too much for Robbie down below, she'd empathetically flick the light switch in our shared stairwell, which also controlled the light bulb in our upstairs hallway, on and off, again and again, her polite-ish way of telling us to pipe down. Robbie and Terry were older. They grew up in a different era with different concerns. They'd seen things our parents hadn't, things that Craig and I, in our racist childishness, couldn't begin to guess. This was some version of what my mother would say if we got too wound up about the grouchiness downstairs. Even if we didn't know the context, we were instructed to remember that context existed. Everyone on earth, they'd tell us, was carrying around an unseen history, and that alone deserved some tolerance. Robbie, I'd learned many years later, had sued Northwestern University for discrimination, having registered for a choral music workshop there in 1943 and had been denied a room in the women's dorm. She was instructed to stay instead in a rooming house in a town, a place for coloreds, she was told. Terry, meanwhile, had once been a Pullman porter on one of the overnight passenger rail lines, running in and out of Chicago. It was a respectable, if not well-paying profession, made up entirely of black men who kept their uniforms immaculate while also hauling luggage, serving meals, and generally tending to the needs of train passengers, including shining their shoes. Years after his retirement, Terry still lived in a state of numbed formality, impeccably dressed, remotely servile, never asserting himself in any way, at least that I would see. It was as if he'd surrendered a part of himself as a way of coping. I'd watch him mow our lawn in the high heat of summer in a pair of wing tips, suspenders, and a thin-brimmed fedora. The sleeves of his dress shirt carefully rolled up. He'd indulge himself by having exactly 1 cigarette a day and exactly 1 cocktail a month. And even then, he wouldn't loosen up the way my father and mother would after having a highball or a Schlitz. After which they did a few times a month.
Some part of me wanted Terry to talk, to spill whatever secrets he carried. I imagined that he had all sorts of interesting stories about cities he visited, how rich people on trains behaved or maybe didn't. But we didn't hear any of it. For some reason, he'd never tell. I was about 4 when I decided I wanted to learn piano. Craig was in the 1st grade. I was already making trips downstairs for weekly lessons on Robbie's upright, returning relatively unscathed. Unscathed. I was figured I was ready. I was pretty convinced I already had learned piano. In fact, through straight up osmosis. All those hours spent listening to other kids fumbling through their songs, the music was already in my head. I just wanted to go downstairs and demonstrate to my exacting great aunt what a gifted girl I was. How it would take no effort at all for me to become her star student. Robbie's piano sat in a small square room at the rear of the house, close to a window that overlooked the backyard. She kept a potted plant in one corner, a folding table where students could fill out music worksheets in the other. During lessons, she sat straight up, spun in an alcohol
upholstered, high-back armchair, tapping out the beat with one finger, her hand cocked as she listened keenly for each mistake. Was I afraid of Robbie? Not exactly, but there was a scariness to her. She represented a rigid kind of authority I hadn't yet encountered elsewhere. She demanded excellence from every kid who sat on her piano bench. I saw her as someone to win over, or maybe somehow conquer. With her, it always felt like there was something to prove. At my first lesson, my legs dangled from the piano bench, too short to reach the floor. Robbie gave me my own elementary music workbook, which I was thrilled about, and showed me how to position my hands properly over the keys. "All right, pay attention," she said, scolding me before we'd even begun. "Find middle C." When you're little, a piano can look like it has 1,000 keys. You really? Go ahead.
You're starting at an expanse of black and white that stretches farther than two small arms can reach. Middle C, I soon learned, was the anchoring point. It was the tutorial line between where the right hand and the left hand travel, between the tremble and the bass clefs, as if you could lay